Now, Fight Back with Libby Znaimer on Zoomer Radio.
Good afternoon and welcome. If you are a Toronto homeowner, did you get one of these? I am holding up a very official yellow notice from the city of Toronto that says, important notice, action required. And the action required is to attest that you actually live in your home for at least 6 months a year in order to avoid the new vacancy tax. And you know what? A lot of people think this is a scam. It isn't. And if you don't get that attestation done by February the 2nd, you'll be fined $250. Now, the vacancy tax itself is a lot higher than that. It's 1% of the assessed value of your home. If your home is worth $1 million, and most everyone's is, that's $10,000. Now, there are a number of exemptions, like renovations, that have already been permitted, under which you'd be allowed to leave the home vacant. And the city says that this move will free up housing and will also generate between $55 and $66 million a year. I'm not really sure how they get to that number. We will be talking to a city official a little bit later, and hopefully he can tell us something about that. So what do you think? There's also a question of how much it's going to cost to enforce this, among all the other things that the city, frankly, does not enforce. 416-360-0740, toll free 1-866-740-4740. And now I'm joined by Allan Ritchie, managing partner at Loopstra Nixon LLP and an adjunct professor of law at Toronto Metropolitan University, Phil Soper, CEO of Royal LePage, and John Caliendo, co-chair of the ABC Residents Associations. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, Libby. Thanks for having us.
Okay, let us begin with Allan Ritchie. What's your reaction about this? We've known about this tax, but, frankly, when we got this notice, we thought, this is a little bit aggressive.
Yeah, I think when I look at these things, I think about it both as a citizen and as a lawyer. And, there's a lot of these municipal things that don't ultimately get enforced. Certainly the powers are there. The bylaw has been passed properly. The question is whether or not they will actually enforce this thing at the end of the day, and whether the behavioral impacts that they're trying to achieve will actually be achieved. And I think that remains to be seen. But we've had clients calling us up and wondering whether or not this is another parking ticket scam, and we've got to tell them no. It's it's the real deal.
Okay, let's go to Phil Soper. Phil, you're in the real estate business. So first of all, how many people do you think actually keep their homes vacant, and why would they do that other than, a long trip or something?
Yeah. Well, that's the real question here. Is this a political move, or is this something that could actually move the needle on housing supply, which we have a housing supply crisis in the GTA and in large municipalities across the country. We've had a similar tax, a similar policy in place in Vancouver since 2017, and it has shown to move the number of people declaring that their property is open. That may be different than the people that actually have it open, by about 1%. And that isn't a lot, but it is material. And it did raise money similar to what the proposal says that it can raise. So where I look at it is if we don't like home flipper, or it's house flippers, people who buy to speculate and then flip the property like it's an equity or something, a stock. If they add value through renovations, that's different. But just house flippers aren't aren't helping. So there's nothing wrong with the public policy, and if it does contribute to public coffers, and they say they're going to redirect it into affordable housing, which is great, then I have no issue with the policy at a high level. Will it be effective in materially helping our housing supply crisis? No, it's a minor move.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, do we have the same kind of demographic? Because we know that in Vancouver, which is closer to Asia Pacific, there are people there who come from places like China, and it's a bit of an insurance policy. You know, they live in places that aren't governed that well. And I'm wondering if we even have the same situation here with people who might keep a place vacant for that reason. I guess either Phil or Allan can answer that.
Well, look, in Ontario, we've had a non-resident speculation tax for over a year now, and I haven't seen a meaningful, drop-off in foreign investment. I'm not sure whether or not the stats would support that or not. But there's also so many different ways that these taxes can be simply avoided. The question is not only, is the policy sound behind it, but are the mechanisms they're using actually going to achieve it? So, if someone's willing to pay the non-resident speculation tax, which is a much bigger burden, I'd be unfazed or unconvinced that a 1% per year tax that is questionably enforced is really going to change the behavior.
John Caliendo, I gather you're not happy about this.
Libby, actually, not true at all. I think while we have not yet had an opportunity to poll our residents, they've continuously expressed concerns, as others have, about housing availability and affordability issue. But as a retired investment banker, hedge fund guy, the underlying and I agree with the other two speakers, the enforceability, the mechanisms to actually make this work are legitimately, dubious. But the underlying problem is a very real problem. The Bank of Canada, Deputy Governor Beaudry stood up in November 21. The British Columbia Cullen Commission, they've all stood up and said money laundering, money flows, investor-driven speculation is a real problem in this country, well, at least in British Columbia. And in the case of the Bank of Canada, they said it's driving the housing bubble, the valuation bubble. So the idea here is not, I don't think the intent here is to, challenge the quintessential snowbird who might leave their house vacant for 3 or 4 months.
Well, no, there's a 6-month window, as there exactly. is with OHIP. So, so are you saying that you're okay with it, or?
Absolutely. If we can take some of the pressure. The problem is it's such an easy thing to circumvent. So to your other two speakers' points, this is going to be very easy to circumvent. But the underlying problem is very real. There are money flows, especially into the condo development industry, which I've financed, that are very much offshore, very much speculator driven. If those units end up in the rental market, full-time rental market, that's great. But when they don't, that's the problem.
And I agree 100%. And John, I see that in my practice all the time, that what we have is a problem that is caused by the inability of the municipal government to speak to the provincial government and the provincial government's inability to speak to the federal government, because these are problems of income tax non-reporting, provincial system that oversees the land registry that has no ability whatsoever to communicate to the federal system that oversees the income tax. And now we've got the municipal government coming in trying to use a bylaw to solve all these problems. And ultimately, there's game playing and no government talks to the other one, and you can circumvent all of these things.
Okay, let's just hold on a sec. Hold on a sec. I'm going to take a call from Jill in Toronto. Hello, Jill.
Hi, Libby. Thank you. And I listen to your program, and you're doing a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Go ahead. You're on the air.
We got this notice, and first when we looked at it, we said, it doesn't apply to us because we don't have any property that's vacant for 6 months. And then we read it again and said, it says everybody must apply. So we called that portal and got the answer that the portal is not working. It's under repair. Then we are saying, why do you send out notice when your portal is not ready? Then I called 311. It says call 311 if you need assistance. So I called 311. They said, oh, yeah, it's not working, but we are trying to fix it, and hopefully we'll fix it by the 15th. What kind of this is organization?
All I can tell you is that we did the attestation online at my home yesterday, and it was fine. So I would say try again. And I think you can also send it in by mail. I'm not sure about that, but we had no problem yesterday. But you're right, that happens a lot too. They say, go ahead and do it, and then there's some glitch. Jill, thanks for your call.
It's interesting, Libby. One of the things that's popped up in Vancouver is a cottage industry around making your home appear occupied. Now, these people are conceivably still, well, they are breaking the law if they report it occupied and it's not. But there are lots of small businesses now that will walk people in and out of your house on a regular basis. They keep a newspaper running. They have, basically smart devices that are turning lights on and off. It used to be people tracked electricity use, or the government could as an indication of whether the place was being used, but that isn't a key now. So entrepreneurs will find a way around this. And we have an Airbnb moratorium, if you want to call it that, in Toronto, and people are working their way around that, and the enforcement seems to be very lax. So there's a credibility, a cry wolf problem that the city has as they roll out this new legislation.
Okay. First of all, people, I'm hearing all kinds of noises in your rooms, which will make it hard for our listeners to hear you. So please be mindful of that. I read one estimate that it will cost $3.1 million to enforce this with about 25 staffers. Allan, Ritchie, what do you think of that?
Gosh, if they enforce it any way along the lines of how they enforce building permits and unpermitted work, I know when our clients complain to the city, they can expect that someone's going to follow up on that 8 months later, largely after everything's been complete, if at all. You're right. And so, those 25 workers, whether or not they actually deploy them or not, I don't think that's realistic. This can't be looked at as a reasonable money-making opportunity. I think it's really about trying to create some behavior modification, and I think it's questionable whether or not it will achieve that goal.
Well, I'm looking at the list of exemptions where you could keep the house empty for a bit. Death is one of them, death of the registered owner. Repairs or renovations, but there's a clarification that it has to be repairs and renovations that have already been permitted. And I think you just underscored a big problem that getting a permit for anything these days is no easy feat. Phil?
Well, absolutely. And part of the issue, the city has for years not enforced the building standards as it relates to basement apartments. And they've sort of said that intentionally. They say we need the basement apartments more than we need them to be compliant, so we're not going to enforce that. And when we think about the problems of getting building permits, there's the vast majority of things that you need a permit for are just there so the city knows what's going on. It has nothing to do with whether or not the renovations are going to be done to code. So a number of entrepreneurs, if they're buying houses and intending to create rental housing, they want to be in there and actually doing these changes and getting it ready to put out for rent very, very quickly. And in this case, we're actually slowing down the process. We're making renovations less desirable because now we're increasing the cost to say, notwithstanding the fact that you may have had a perfect renovation done completely to code that didn't get the proper permitting, we're now going to hit you with this tax, or we're now going to exclude you. So we've thrown some red tape into the mix here, which could have the intent of chilling some of these renovation projects.
Let us take a call from Maureen in North York. Hello, Maureen.
Hi. Good afternoon. As a senior, I want to say when I got that notice, and my senior friends also, we were really kind of frightened. We thought, what's happening here? We're living here. Is someone taken over our property or something? The wording is very explosive, and I think it should have been worded differently and explain this instead of saying, notice of non-occupancy, just to say, and also I think because there are still people out there, and I know a couple who do not have computers, it should have included a paper form.
You're right. I'm just looking at it. It's a yellow piece of paper, and it does not include a paper form, though I didn't deal with it, so there may be, and I think I had the envelope, so you're right. It does not have a paper form. It tells you to call 311, which I always say, call 311, good luck with that.
Yes.
But anyway, Maureen, it's not really that frightening. As I said, we did it online. It took a few minutes, so it wasn't really a big deal, though getting it is like, what the heck is that?
Well, the problem could arise with someone who doesn't file it. They're automatically going to add the $250 fine to the tax bill and have the ability to add the tax on the full 1% of the assessed value just for not filing the form. So I think they're going to have a real enforcement problem with those who don't file it. You'll have hundreds of thousands of homes where people just didn't do the homework, and now they've got to reverse these major tax bills that people are going to get.
Yeah, and I think they deem the home vacant if you don't file.
I'm not sure about that because they seem to be making a distinction about making the property status declaration and having it and having a false declaration as they make the distinction between
but
that
the
and
penalty,
having vacant.
if you actually look at the bylaw, the penalty for failing to file the declaration is $250 at the beginning, but there's also a consequence of them just assessing the value. So they may or may not to do that, but the bylaw simply does allow them to do that. If you fail to file it, they will just eventually assess that tax.
Well,
and then there's an appeals mechanism there.
The assumption we've taken is that if you don't file, you're going to end up being fined the small amount, $250, and you're going to be assessed. So that's a safe position. I think you should take as a homeowner if you decide, you're going to protest this move as an infringement on your rights or something and not file. You can face a very substantial tax bill.
I think people are just going to be, some people are just not going to be quite sure what to do, or they won't have computers, or 311 won't answer. I think there's going to be stuff like that. But if they, in fact, hire 25 people making good city salaries to do this, then they'll be busy, I guess.
I'm doubtful.
Undoubtful. I mean, there's apparently a shortage of city workers as well. I'm going to bring in Casey Brendan from the city's revenue services. I have a few questions. Hi, Casey. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks very much.
Okay, so my first question is, you say that this will raise between $55 and $66 million. How did you arrive at that number?
That was a number that was estimated. We looked to the city of Vancouver, who have a similar program, and without actually knowing how many vacant properties we have in Toronto, we used their assumption that 1% of all residential properties will be vacant. So if we take that and apply that to Toronto, 1% of Toronto's residential properties could be vacant. With an average current value assessment and a 1% tax rate, that would raise between 55 and 66 million.
But we have a very different situation here. I was saying that in Vancouver, it's closer to the Asia-Pacific Rim, and there are people there who, have houses in Vancouver as a safety thing because their governments are not so great. And I'm not sure that we have the same situation here. Here in Toronto, there are a lot of property owners, overseas property owners, whose kids go to school here, so the property is tenanted then. Am I wrong?
And no, and you're quite right, because we don't really know whether we have a lot of vacant and unoccupied units in the city of Toronto. We may or may not have the same problem that Vancouver was experiencing, and so this will be a learning experience for us as we go through this for the first time and actually find out how many vacant units are out there.
I've also seen an estimate that it will take 25 staffers and cost $3.1 million to even begin to enforce this. Is that right?
The numbers that you've quoted come from the staff report that, yes, indicate that we planned on operating costs of $3 million per year, and that is to provide compliance, to answer questions, to respond to inquiries, and of course we will have to see if we adopt a reduced compliance program, if we don't have that many properties that are deemed vacant, those numbers could decrease as well.
So a couple of other questions. So in terms of the exemptions for this, repairs and renovations are one of them, and it's been clarified that you mean renovations that have been permitted, but it's very difficult to get a permit.
Yes, the exemption, if your home is under renovation, is to show that if the property is uninhabitable because it's undergoing renovations, then you certainly can't rent it out. And so all we would look for there is evidence that a homeowner is actively undertaking renovations. If they're waiting for permits, we would take that into consideration when we examine these things. So yes, we realize there are all kinds of circumstances that may prolong a renovation period of time. The goal in this is to not find those kind of units, it's to find the units that are purposely being kept vacant, that could otherwise be rented out.
And my final question to you is, our other panelists seem to think that if you do not declare, first you'll get fined $250, but that is just the first step and you will be assessed. Or is there some investigation that would happen in the meantime, or is that just a straight line from fine to assessment?
Well, the City of Toronto will give property owners every opportunity to declare the status of their property. And so even a late declaration, we will send out notifications following the first due date if people haven't submitted their response with a reminder to make a declaration. It is the case where we do not receive any kind of declaration from a property owner, then the property will be deemed to be vacant as a result of no response, and the tax will apply. But again, a property owner in that situation, had they been deemed vacant and they can establish through the appeals and the complaints process that in fact they weren't vacant, then they would not be subject to the tax on appeal.
Okay, Casey, thank you very much for clarifying those things. Appreciate it.
Most welcome. Thank you.
Okay, and just before we wrap this up, Phil Soper, what did you think of what you just heard?
It fit with our expectations of how the city was going to manage the program. I think people should treat it seriously, and it is going to impact people everywhere. It's going into Ottawa. I know it'll come in Montreal. Foreign ownership or foreign investment in Canadian cities it's prolific right across the country. You'd be surprised, even in places like Halifax, we're seeing Asian money. That'll obviously quiet down as the federal government institutes its moratorium for a couple of years. But Canada remains a really important or a very solid place to invest in property. We've got some 1.8 million homes, a shortage of some 1.8 million homes relative to other advanced nations per capita. And that's going to put upward pressure on property prices over the coming decade. People know that, and so putting in place guidelines to help eliminate people just using a home in a city that's shortage of homes as an investment isn't a bad thing. Whether or not it's effective, that remains to be seen.
John, what did you think of what you just heard?
I agree 100%. I think, in fact, I would encourage you to invite the Federal Minister of Finance, who, when asked about this issue, her response was, well, it shows the confidence that offshore investors have in Canada. Not the right answer. Invite also the Provincial Minister of Finance onto your show. This is a Canada-wide issue. The data shows that the Pacific Rim invests aggressively in the GTA, but it's not just the Pacific Rim. It's offshore money flows are coming from every region of the world, and they're driving this. And this is a Band-Aid. And the question comes back to, as your other guest said, the effectiveness of enforceability, and certainly in short-term rental enforceability is non-existent in our neighborhoods. Whether they're going to do a better job with this, we'll see.
Allan, Ritchie, last 20 seconds to you.
I think the key here is better communication between the different levels of government. The provincial government has the data. The federal government enforces the income tax. This whole concept of speculation in foreign money gets solved when the income tax system matches up with the provincial system and the municipal system, because all the data is there. They just need to work with it together so that people can't skirt these taxes so simply.
Okay, thank you so much, John Caliendo, Phil Soper, and Allan Ritchie.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Pleasure. Take care.
Take care.
Pleasure, Libby.